a poignant beginning to the final day of the G7 summit in Hiroshima, as leaders from partner countries and organisations visited the Peace Memorial Park. They paid their respects to the victims of the 1945 atomic bombing of the city by the US Air Force. The US is the only country ever to use nuclear weapons in war. The Japanese Prime Minister, whose political constituency is Hiroshima, wants it to stay that way.
The G7 leaders understood the reality of nuclear weapons and realized the wishes of the people and importance of peace. That's the historic significance of holding the summit here. And with another nuclear threat looming, we must ensure it never, ever, ever comes to that.
In a city annihilated by war 7 to 8 years ago, the central conversations were of a present-day conflict. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy's presence in Hiroshima overshadowed the other items on the G7 leaders' agenda. US President Joe Biden announced a further weapons package for Kyiv, saying it would include ammunition, artillery and armoured vehicles. Zelenskyy had already welcomed the Pentagon's decision to allow F-16 fighter jets to be provided to Ukraine. The Kremlin called the announcement a colossal mistake. In a separate meeting, Biden invited the leaders of Japan and South Korea to the White House. The two countries still reel from a painful history of Japanese colonisation in the Korean peninsula, and both are concerned about China. Chinese President Xi Jinping held a parallel summit in Xi'an, hosting leaders with an entirely different set of values. China's growing influence was one of the themes discussed at the G7. But Zelenskyy stole the headlines. Analysts say the G7 as an organisation has been searching for its mission, and that Zelenskyy has managed simultaneously to eclipse what the G7 wants to do, while also being the epitome of it.
Ukraine will need an air force, and they can't keep and hold enough territory without an air force. And so the sooner they get an air force, the quicker this war comes to an end. Ultimately, and unfortunately, despite all this talk about escalation and escalatory moves by the two sides, this war comes to an end when the Ukrainians are armed strongly enough to dissuade the Russians from continuing the operation the Russians started. And so in that sense, you have to escalate to de-escalate, unfortunately.
Hiroshima knows all about escalating in order to de-escalate. It was a profoundly symbolic stage for the leaders of 7 of the world's most powerful democracies to discuss war and security. Claire Herriot, TRT World.